Welcome our video audience today. It's good to have you with us as always. I'm Sherwin. I'm the pastor here at Laketon Bethel. And we have two services, one at 9 and one at 11. And today I'm going to talk about divorce. So just to be clear, divorce is an abomination. And if you are getting divorced, you are going straight to hell. You're laughing. That's what I was taught as a kid. It's what I grew up believing. And, you know, somebody had to put that in my head. I didn't think that up by myself. When I was growing up, divorce was a weird thing. It wasn't common. Things have changed a lot since then. Lots of people in this community of Sioux Center, Iowa, where I grew up, had to get married. You know, they have a premarital pregnancy, so you would get married. And you lived your life in misery, but you deserved it because you had committed this grievous sin of getting somebody pregnant before they got married. So all these couples were together like that, and they lived in misery. If you got a divorce, I was quite certain that you would be going to hell. And I detected, I thought I could in my early days, I could tell if a person had been divorced because there was a certain hardness about them. I actually thought I could perceive that, but you know, I was probably wrong. Had a seminary classmate when I was at seminary over there in Holland, and he went through a divorce. And I thought, he cannot possibly go on to become a pastor. I mean, he's getting a divorce. And then it happened to me. And I was shocked and ashamed. A year and a half out of seminary, I got served papers one night, and the sheriff himself delivered it to me because he was a Reformed church elder. What could he do, you know? He delivered me the papers, and I sat and stewed. I had a sense that it might be coming, but I didn't realize it was coming. Called my mom about 11 o'clock that night. I was 26 years old at the time. Called my mom, and she, did her normal, oh, that's too bad, so sorry. My dad was asleep. She woke him up to tell him that I'd gotten served papers, and you know what he said? That's the best thing that could happen to that kid. He knew. I didn't. But he knew. He was right. Well, today, folks, I stand here as a legally ordained pastor in the oldest denomination in the United States, and I tell you that I am grateful for divorce. I'm thankful that it happens. It's like it's God's gift to us to help us correct nasty situations. And many of you have been through it. And it is painful. And if you're going through it now or in the near future, my sympathy to you. It's nasty business. If you're trying to heal from it from years ago, good for you. It's a long process. And divorce, is a funeral for a dead marriage. Today we're going to look at some Bible passages on divorce that may or may not help you. I hope they do. This is by no means an exhaustive Bible study on the subject. I could go till it gets dark outside, and none of you would like that very much. But there's a lot of teaching in the Bible on this. I've taken some of the main passages. As you know, I'm going through the Sermon on the Mount, so these are key teachings of Jesus that we want to look at today. This is from Matthew chapter 5. All right, it says, remember the scripture that says, whoever divorces his wife, let him do it legally, giving her divorce papers and her legal rights. Too many of you are using that as a cover for selfishness and whim, pretending to be righteous just because you are legal. Please, no more pretending. If you divorce your wife, you're responsible for making her an adulteress, unless she's already made herself that way by sexual promiscuity. And if you marry such a divorced adulteress, you're automatically an adulterer yourself. You can't use legal cover to mask a moral failure. See, what was going on in that day was you could divorce your wife if she burnt your dinner. You didn't need a reason. Divorce was very common. It just happened all the time. And Jesus' point is, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right. You don't want to just trade up all the time or trade down, whichever the case might be. I was thinking about that. For 9 years I drove Honda Accord. Really liked that car. But it had a 4-cylinder and a manual transmission and no Bluetooth. And I got sick of shifting. I finally decided I need an automatic, and I wanted a 6-cylinder. I wanted something with a little more kick because, I didn't know that gas was going to go to $4.50. So I traded it off for a car with an automatic and a 6-cylinder engine and Bluetooth. That's clearly a trade-up. That's what Jesus is talking against. Don't, get out of your marriage just to trade up. In the same Sermon on the Mount, he told us to treat others the way we want to be treated. That's a big part of his teaching, so we want to go with that. Now, there's another kind of keystone passage that Jesus uses, or that talks about Jesus' perspective on this, from Mark chapter 10. It says, some Pharisees came and tried to trap him with this question, should a man be allowed to divorce his wife? And Jesus answered them with a question. What did Moses say in the law about divorce? And, he's being a good teacher there. He wanted them to tell him what their scriptures said about divorce. And they did. He said, well, he permitted it, they replied. He said a man can give his wife a written notice of divorce and send her away. And it's true. They could. That was the Old Testament way. If your wife burned if your wife burned your pork chops, but they were Jews, you didn't eat pork. But you could divorce her. Just give her a letter and send her away. The Jewish certificate of divorce is called a get. And I have no idea why it's called a get. But I was able to get a manuscript of it. It's not very readable, but that's an English translation of it. And what you basically did is and this thing is thousands of years old, you went and stood by a river with 2 witnesses, and you wrote her off. Now, the wife couldn't divorce the husband, but the husband could divorce the wife, which tells you a lot about that culture. The adultery laws then don't apply because you're single. Jesus was, of course, contradicting this. The nature of Jesus is you put people first and rules second. And he's always been that way. All right, so this passage goes on then. Jesus responding, he wrote this commandment only as a concession to your hard hearts. But God made them male and female from the beginning of creation. This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they are no longer two but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. And of course, this passage has been read at millions of weddings. I've always had this question, why did God make male and female? Think of all the trouble that would save the human race if there's just one gender. Think of how much easier that, it wouldn't be as interesting, but it'd be easier. But I could not figure out why God made male and female until between the services today, Donna enlightened me. She said the reason is that God started out with male and thought he could do better. And so the female is the crown of his creation. I don't know where you get your facts from, Donna, but we'll accept it for now. All right, but anyway, this passage talks about how a man is joined to his wife. Again, very sexist language, reflecting the period that it was written in. It says they're no longer two but one. You see that every once in a while, couples that are married. I talked to one couple this morning, they're married 62 years. And he starts a sentence out and she finishes it. Every time. It's kind of comical, but it's just how it works. They finish each other's sentences. Here he says, what God has joined together, let no man cast asunder, the old language goes. Well, does God join together all marriages? I don't believe he does. And that's what we need to be aware of. There's lots of marriages that God didn't have anything to do with. He gives us free will and lets us make dumb mistakes and lets us do good things. but he doesn't put them all together. Now, here's a strange passage from Paul that drives fundamentalists nuts. It's almost scary to read. But here's Paul giving some advice. He says, "But for those who are married, I have a command that does not come from me, but from the Lord. A wife must not leave her husband. But if she does leave him, let her remain single or else be reconciled to him. And the husband must not leave his wife." And that has affected American Christianity deeply. Charles Stanley, Southern Baptist pastor, big church in Atlanta, is divorced. And he has to, in order to keep his ordination, has to stay single. If he marries somebody other than his ex-wife, he's out. Now remember, this is a Southern Baptist denomination. They got started because they wanted to defend slavery. This is a ridiculous teaching. If you look at the context of Paul, Paul was convinced that the world was going to end like within a few weeks. He was certain that the end was going to come. He was wrong. I'm okay with that. I hope you are. But Paul got that wrong. And that what he's saying here is, look, the world's going to tank in just a couple weeks. Don't bother getting a divorce. Just stay single. He did not intend for this to be applied universally in 2022. It was a time, situation sort of thing. But there are those who take it literally and try to apply it today. Paul believed that the end was near. And you know what's the one thing in common of everybody who's predicted the end of the world, in the history of the world? Everybody who's predicted it has been wrong up to this point. And I'm not going to predict it. So Paul goofed there, and that's okay. Now there's a curious passage in the Old Testament where the Jews were in exile. They were taken out of Jerusalem, out of Judea, into Babylon. And as they were coming back, and sometimes in Babylon, they started to marry women who were not Jews. You know, it was a scary thing to marry a non-Jew. And they started families with them. It's kind of a mixed marriage thing. You know, like my wife was Christian Reformed. It's a mixed marriage, you know. But, yeah, you can tell her I said that. The thing is, you know, it was looked down because these women were ethnically impure and they had a different religion. So they decided that was not right to be married to these women. So in order to honor God, they got divorces. And it's really fun to read this passage to right-wingers who say divorce is always wrong, because in this passage it's like God ordained this divorce because of race. It's really a mixed up thing. But it's from the book of Ezra in the Old Testament. And this is kind of a summary verse. Shechaniah, son of Jehiel, of the family of Elam, acting as a spokesman, said to Ezra, "We betrayed our God by marrying foreign wives from the people around here. But all is not lost. There is still hope for Israel. Let's make a covenant right now with our God, agreeing to get rid of all these wives and their children, just as my master and those who honor God's commandment are saying." It's what the Revelation, which meant the books of Moses, says, so let's do it. So they were married to these women who were not Jews. They had to get rid of them because it was the right thing to do in God's eyes. According to them, God ordered divorce. Got to get rid of these pagan women and their children. Now, that's been in every Bible that's ever been published, but people don't know it's in there. You know it's there now. So you are the teachers of Muskegon, because it's there, and it needs to be looked at. The thing is that the Bible is flexible as a whole when it comes to divorce. And We need to realize that. Is divorce okay? Well, according to the Bible, it's allowed, but it's not required. So if you're considering a divorce, think it through carefully. Treat people right as you're going through it. The name calling, the gossip, the slander won't help anything, and be sure you take care of yourself. If you're recovering from divorce, take it easy on yourself. Manage your distractions and pay attention to your soul, because it's a long process. And if you've never been divorced, try to avoid self-pity if your marriage isn't working out exactly right. It dawned on me when I was in South Dakota that I was being judged for getting divorced, that my accusers were jealous. They were trapped in bad marriages, and they saw me as getting out. They saw me as getting free. And they were jealous, which I reminded them of when I saw them in later years. But it happened. See, the entire Dakota classis has left the Reformed Church, mostly because, well, the Reformed Church requires them to pay pastors a living wage, and now they don't have to do that anymore. So that's kind of why they left. But it's interesting how this works. Avoid the self-pity, avoid the jealousy. If you have a good marriage, be grateful for it and work at making it better. And remember that forgiveness is not the same thing as reconciliation. You have to forgive your ex for your own sanity. You must forgive your ex for your soul to heal. But you don't need to have anything to do with them. I always say forgiveness is granted, but access is denied. Forgiveness means you're going to let it go. Reconciliation means you're going to have a relationship with the ex, and you can if you want, but you're not required to. You know, if somebody beats you up and hurts you physically, forgive them, but lock your doors. Don't let it happen again. Same with divorce. Forgive, but don't get hurt again. Divorce is nasty business. Again, it's permitted by Scripture, but not required. Divorce can be, to me, it's an extension of God's grace that gives us a chance to get past a big mistake. And I believe the obligation of followers of Jesus is to be supportive of those who are hurting, including those going through a divorce. Paul's teaching that is very clear on this is this one from Romans 12. Be happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with each other. Don't be too proud to enjoy the company of ordinary people. And don't think you know it all. I think that is the best verse that there is for ministry to people who are going through a divorce. I'd recommend hanging it on your fridge for a while. It's a good one. And I believe that's all I have to say about this. I anticipate getting some feedback. And to the video audience, as always, thanks for listening.